Hello everyone, this is Romola D from Romola D Reports, and I am doing a very quick news break. This is news break 81, I think, and I'm doing it because I had a very interesting conversation with a good friend from Australia, Corbus Hendrick, and he's the one who has led me to these documents that I'm going to share with everyone. And this information that is actually widely available online on the World Health Organization website and on various other websites. And what it reveals, however, is pretty huge. What it basically reveals is that this entire COVID-19 so-called pandemic that we are seeing around the world was actually the product of a plan, a world plan that 194 countries signed off on, and in fact it was the consequence of a world agreement made many years ago, and something to which all of these countries have been building up onto the present day. So to kind of establish the truth of what I'm saying over here, I'm going to very briefly point to a few statements, and then I'll come back and go through these documents in greater detail. So first of all, let me just go to this page. It's on the World Health Organization website, who.int, and if you can find it from the newsroom, and it talks about international health regulations, and it basically says that the international health regulations, which has a date attached to it, the 2005, represents a binding international legal agreement involving 196 countries across the globe, including all the member states of WHO. You know, I've seen both these numbers, 194 and 196, and I'll show you both in a second. Their aim is to help the international community prevent and respond to acute public health risks that have the potential to cross borders and threaten people worldwide. The purpose and scope of the IHR 2005 is to protect against, control and provide a public health response to the international spread of disease in ways that are commensurate with and restricted to public health risks, and which avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade. Now, I'm going to very briefly go to a page, it's page 39 of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board's 2019 annual report. Now, I'll talk more about this board and their various annual reports in just a minute, and I'd like to go through this particular document in a little detail. It's a bit of an overview document, so, you know, a lot of fluff and not much substance, so it will be easy to kind of go straight through. Look at numbers 1 and 2 under Progress Indicators by September 2020, and these are progress indicators for a particular objective. And this is the objective. It's sort of last or lower down in this document, and I'll come back to it later. But this is what it's talking about. The United Nations must strengthen coordination mechanisms. It's talking about coordination across countries, across health systems, not just nationwide, but worldwide, across nation borders, during health emergencies, and working with the United Nations and working with the WHO. Okay, and I'll go back and read all of that later more closely. But the progress indicators for this particular objective or mission are these. 1. The Secretary General of the United Nations, with the Director General of the WHO and Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, strengthens coordination, identifies clear roles and responsibilities, timely triggers for a coordinated UN system-wide response for health emergencies. So it simply spells out who's responsible, and as you can tell, it's the United Nations and the World Health Organization. Now, the United Nations, including WHO, and this is the one that we need to look at very closely, conducts at least 2 system-wide training and simulation exercises, including one covering the deliberate release of a lethal respiratory pathogen. And as I said, I'll come back to this document later, but here you have it. This is the information coming out of a report published in September 2019. The United Nations, including WHO, intended to conduct at least 2 system-wide training and simulation exercises, including one covering the deliberate release of a lethal respiratory pathogen. Now this document right here. I can enlarge it a little bit. This document is the bulk of the agreement, the International Health Regulation Agreement that was signed off on by all these 194 or variably 196 countries in 2005. And this agreement has been stated to replace all of the other agreements that have held up till then internationally, various international sanitary and health agreements. And there's a whole list of them, and I'll go through this later. So this document was published in 2008, but it actually carries the gist of an agreement that was signed off on in 2005. And we'll come back to it in just a minute. So keeping in mind this agreement, keeping in mind what this annual report has stated, requiring the UN, including the WHO, to conduct system-wide simulation exercises, and then going straight to, not just Event 201, I'll come back to that in just a minute. Event 201 actually occurred in October 2019. That annual report was published September 2019. So here we've got Mike Pompeo. I'm going to try to play this.
The Chinese government was the first to know of this risk to the world. And that puts a special obligation to make sure that data gets to our scientists, our professionals. This is not about retribution. This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here to get this right. We need to make sure that even today, the data sets that are available to every country, including data sets that are available to the Chinese Communist Party, are made available to the whole world. We need to know immediately. The world is entitled to know. The Chinese government was the first to know of this risk to the world. And that puts a special obligation to make sure that data gets to our scientists, our professionals. This is not about retribution. This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here to get this right. We need to make sure that even today, the data sets that are available to.
So we've all seen this. We've seen this little snippet at a press conference where Mike Pompeo pretty much said that we're in a live exercise, and President Trump turned to him and said, well, you should have let us know. So this has obviously gone around the world several times. It's still, doing the rounds on Twitter. As well it should, because it's one of our first cues and keys that this entire COVID-19 scandemic is a simulation exercise. It's a drill, much like very many other false flags we've seen. But of course, as we all know, it's egregious. We're almost into the 4th month or 5th month of it right now. Economies have shut down around the world. People have lost their jobs around the world. I'm still in India, and over here, there's been incredible damage done to many sectors of the population, in particular the migrant labor population, but also various socioeconomic classes, particularly at the lower end of the ladder, those who had day jobs, who had domestic work, who had, regular wage labor, that very blue-collar jobs that were simply wrenched from them as, all of these edicts to stay at home ensued. So, this kind of damage has been done to every other country in the world as well, all across Asia, all across Africa, all across, the states of Australia and the USA and South America, Central America. So the damage has been extensive, comprehensive, and should be unacceptable to all of us, particularly when we begin to find out that all of this was done on the basis of an exercise. Now, what was this exercise based on? Whose bright idea was this? And what exactly were they doing? And that's part of what these documents tell us. So to go back to those international health regulations, I think one of the things, so I've had a good look at the International Health Regulations 2005. I've read the 2019 report, which I'll kind of go through as quickly as possible right now. And I've also looked up some information from other so-called think tanks or so-called non-profit charitable organizations that are engaged in policy analysis, always from the point of view of the globalists, and working very much hand-in-hand with the WHO, the UN, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the World Economic Forum, all of it. And the picture that's emerging is not a new picture to those who are well versed in these subjects and who've been engaging in this kind of analysis for a long time. But basically, to the rest of us, the picture that's emerging is that this notion of standardizing healthcare, not just inside a country, inside the US, for instance, or inside the UK, but across nation borders, across the entire world, under the aegis of the World Health Organization and a whole bunch of other international organizations associated with it, and foundations, and foundations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and then organizations like the Stimson Center, the Aspen Institute, and various others, the Pirbright Institute, etc. But I'm thinking more in terms of the think tanks at this point, the Stimson Center, the Aspen Institute, probably the Rand Corporation, etc. This attempt to bring healthcare into a central spot and manage it centrally has been going on for a very long time. And this is why I say that, health journalists, medical journalists, science journalists who've been particularly following the subject are perfectly aware of this and know exactly what I'm referring to. But to somebody who's just coming newly to the subject, it's a little bit of a shock to find that something like this, for instance, this entire COVID-19 simulation exercise, which appears to be a live drill, and which involves the destruction of lives and economies, and a lot of false news and disinformation spewed out by our wonderful fake mainstream media. All of this has been in the works, has been planned for decades, and has been steadily building. And we can get a little glimpse of that by simply looking at some of these documents. So let me just go back to this page where I started, the International Health Regulations, and we'll come back to it in just a minute. Let me actually go to this document, and what I've been told is that the World Health Organization, which is now being defunded by the Trump administration, thankfully, may just arise in a new form, as do many of these things, right? So the form in which it might arise is something called the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. So one of the things I learned going through these documents sort of at top speed currently is that there are a few catchwords that you've kind of got to watch out for. One of them is global health security, and the other is global preparedness. And of course the third is monitoring and surveillance. People have now heard the term medical surveillance or health surveillance and health monitoring. So these are the terms, these are the new catchwords of the new medical despotism decade that is fast approaching and has already sort of attempted to subsume us if we don't perk up and begin to speak out about it. And, it's in the interest of informing people, and it's in the interest of kind of showing people the same documents I'm looking at so that you can go and read them, you can look into this yourself, and start spreading the word wherever you are, in your own groups, your own social media, etc. Take this video and spread it, widely and wildly as much as you like, because the whole point is to point to these documents. This is, and to these catchwords, because we need to wake up just about language. A world at risk, and I love looking at the colors as well over here. The lovely blue-green world is suddenly blaringly at risk in red. Annual report on global preparedness for health emergencies, September 2019. Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. So let's keep that name in mind and every one of these words in mind as well. Preparedness and monitoring. because they do mean something. So here we have September 2019. Look at that picture over there with everybody wearing surgical masks and walking about. All that blue, that light blue. And here's the logo of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. And we're going to find out about it in just a minute. Who comprises this board? So here we have a bit of a clue. There are people who've developed the background papers for the GPMB, and these are the organizations involved: Anthrologica, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Independent Oversight Advisory Committee for the WHO Health Emergencies Program, Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security, University of Oxford, Chatham House, Wellcome Trust, the World Bank Group, and the World Health Organization. Yes, right. World bankers are surely deeply interested in our health care. So then we go down and you see these the writers who are being named of this report, and so on. I'm just going to come to the first part of this report over here. There we go. This is what I wanted to look at. It's a 15-member board. It's made up of political leaders, heads of agencies, and experts, led jointly by Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Prime Minister of Norway, Director General of the World Health Organization, Mr. Elhaj Asi, Secretary General of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And I'm going to just go all the way down to the end of this document briefly, just to show you these people, because we have some pictures of who they are. So here is the board. Former Prime Minister H.E. Dr. Gro Harlem, Mr. Elhaj Asi, Dr. Victor Zhao, President of the National Academy of Medicine, USA, Dr. Chris Elias, President, Global Development Program, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sir Jeremy Farrar, Director, Wellcome Trust, UK, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, Director, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Miss Henrietta Fore, Executive Director, UNICEF, Dr. George Gao, Director General, Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, People's Republic of China. Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Let's keep that in mind. This is the Chinese CDC Director General. He is a member of this 15-member board, the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. So he knows all about this report, everything it says, and he has signed off on it. He signed off also on the International Health Regulations of 2005, which required simulation exercises. This particular annual report required simulation exercises before September 2020. So that needs to sink in. So, you know, people in mainstream media saying it's China, it's a Wuhan lab, etc., and disassociating from anything else, from any other information, not giving any context at all for what's going on, are not touching on any of this. That here we've got a global preparedness monitoring board that's been in action for many years, and that's keeping to the international health regulations that 194 or 196 countries signed off on, and all of them agreed. All of these countries agreed to engage in simulation exercises, particularly in 2 live training and simulation exercises for the sake of data collection, those data sets that Mike Pompeo mentioned in his press conference, by September 2020. So to me this is kind of absolutely huge, and so this is my first, approach to this information and my first publishing of this information. And no doubt if I look around, I might find other people have been publishing similar information or this information. If they haven't, they should be. So, this is something that all of us should be sharing, resharing, tweeting, retweeting, and sharing with each other around the world. All of us, just basic common humanity, because we need to know this. Minister of Health, Republic of Rwanda, she's in on it. Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Corporation, the Netherlands. Europe, the Netherlands are in on it. Russia, the Minister of Health, Russian Federation, Professor Veronika Skvortsova, Professor Ilona Kickbush, Director of Global Health Center, Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, Switzerland. Dr. Yasuhiro Suzuki, Chief Medical and Global Health Officer, Vice Minister for Health, Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, Japan. Japan's in on it. Dr. Jeanette Vega Morales, Chief Medical Innovation and Technology Officer, La Red de Salud, UC Christus, Chile. Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. India's in on it. So what does this tell you? These countries are very aware of what's going on. These countries signed the dotted line. They took the pledge. They signed off on this treaty. They agreed to engage in a pandemic exercise. So I'm just going to, show a little bit more information based on this. And all along as I go through this, really the thing to keep in mind is the language that's being used and has been used for a long time, and the fact that these things have been in the works for such a long time. So it's really, reading these documents, you have an insight into a kind of a way of not just speaking and writing, but a way of thinking that is being projected onto us. So we are being encouraged to think as we read this information that the world has fallen into a horrific pit, and horrible diseases are just round the corner every second. And if it weren't for the glorious efforts of this particular group of people keeping an eye on things for us and building these initiatives across time, we would simply not know what to do in terms of being prepared for pandemics, health emergencies, and we would always be at risk. And in fact, that's the title of this report. The world is at risk. The world at risk. The goals, let's look at the goals. The goals of the board are to assess the world's ability to protect itself from health emergencies, identify critical gaps to preparedness. Remember, preparedness is one of those keywords to watch out for. So on the basis of preparedness, just like public safety and public health risk, they are engaging in massive crime. I mean, I can only call it crime when I look across at what's happening in the world today. And if people haven't yet seen my interview with Peggy Hall, where she out and out calls the people who are breaking the law by projecting laws and orders on all of us to wear masks, socially distance, etc. She outright calls it tyranny, and that is absolutely right. Hats off to Peggy Hall for saying that, and for bringing that to everybody's attention. That's Peggy Hall. Interviews with Changemakers, number 18. Please check that out on YouTube. And there's also an article on Peggy that I published, on that interview that I published today or yesterday, early morning today possibly. Here it is. Peggy Hall, the Healthy American, questioning authority, finding tyranny, the unlawful COVID edicts from U.S. governors, mayors, health officers. And as people know, this is the same worldwide. Every single government is putting out these incredible laws and edicts. And I just got the news that in Australia, they are quarantining people in buildings now. They're literally locking people away in their apartments. They're bringing food to them and so forth. But if you are tested and found to have COVID, you're being locked away in a building now. And actually, I have witnessed that on the streets very close to here, where I am currently in India. And this is Chennai, India. And indeed, they are boarding up the doors. They're putting signs on the doors. They are treating people as if they have the bubonic plague. Talking about the bubonic plague, I actually did hear tell that a case of bubonic plague has been found in China. So maybe that's the second live training and simulation exercise we can look forward to, according to the GPMB document that we are going to go back to right now. So the board has a 5-year initial term, and this is just stuff about how the board is constructed and what it does. It explores, identifies needs and actions required to accelerate preparedness for health emergencies. So in actuality, what has already happened, and we are not in the realm of conspiracy theory or projecting and trying to see conspiracies. We are actually looking at a conspiracy. We are looking at a group of people who have come together from around the world, who have formed a global monitoring board. They're calling it a Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. They're working under the aegis of the WHO, and they might replace the WHO because they're well poised to do that at this point in time. They represent world figures, they represent world systems in healthcare and medical services, and they have come together with a common goal to engage in global health security in the name of public health. So they are, in a sense, kind of extending what the WHO has been doing all along. But it appears with a focus, and that focus is epidemics, pandemics, sudden disasters of that nature. And I understand the future of global health security is also to look into disasters. So that's what we can expect to see. The point I wanted to make about pandemics and this fear that we're all being given that, we're going to be hit with a new virus that's going to be just around the corner is, of course, disassociated from that other much larger enterprise, which some of us know a great deal about, and that enterprise is bioweaponry and biowarfare. And the US has been engaging in bioweaponry research for a very long time, and, decades. And so has the UK, as we can tell now from the many patents. The coronavirus patent in itself gives away that story. So the time period that we have come to, it appears, is the time period of moving from just developing viruses and developing bioweaponry, but to using these viruses and bioweaponry on world populaces. Who is it going to be used on? It's going to be used on all of us. It's like we're all in a war zone. The entire world has become a war zone. It's become a war zone certainly for electromagnetic weaponry, as I've reported very often. It's also become a war zone for bioweaponry. And in fact, it appears that bioweaponry and electromagnetic weaponry work hand in hand really well together, because there've been lots of experimental weapons testing programs where viruses and EMF radiation are being tested in tandem. I have actually seen the statements, not the statements of work, the RFPs, the request for proposal, on the fedbizops.gov website, looking to examine the effects of viruses on large populations in the presence of radiation. So that's a point that I think we need to keep in mind, that we've moved into a space of weapons testing, bioweapons testing, and the battle space is planet Earth, really, and all of humanity. All of us are sitting ducks over here for these bioweapons being unleashed on us. And, of course, there's a large portion of psyops associated with it as well, as far as COVID-19 or coronavirus is concerned. For a very long time, none of us could figure out if there was a real virus. If there is a real virus, what is a virus? Do viruses matter? And all of those conversations are very, very apt and relevant and germane. But there are also bioweapons. So it looks like what's happening when you look at these documents is these guys who have written these documents are looking ahead to a time period when the bioweapons will be unleashed on us, and what they are calling it is pandemics. They're calling it, sort of the natural coming up explosion of pandemics just out of the blue, as if this kind of thing can just happen out of the blue. It's deliberately manipulated, managed, and engineered in biological labs, bioweaponry and biowarfare labs. So this is the language. It talks about biological risks manifesting as epidemics and pandemics, country preparedness capacities, R&D, community engagement and trust. Community engagement and trust is another kind of keyword to watch out for. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? The whole community caring for each other and looking out for each other. But what it really comes down to ultimately, as we know now, is contact tracing, health monitoring, surveillance, bio-neighbors, snitching, Stasi behavior, and the removal of all of your healthcare freedoms, your medical freedoms, and your basic freedom to live, breathe, and act independently and individually for yourself. So this is something we need to resist at every level. So anyway, so this is what this board is striving to do, and it's very, very focused on preparedness for health emergencies. And here's a little notice that they are giving here, that they're planning to also monitor progress on natural disasters. And that will be the next big calamity to overtake the world, no doubt. But we're still in the throes of the first big one. So let's go back. And so they talk about 7 actions. Now look at chapter 3 over here. I'm just looking at them flying through the table of contents over here. There are actions for leaders to take. Leadership is so important. Effective systems are so important. Basically what they mean is they want all the prime ministers of all of the countries to sign off on this. Effective systems is to bring in every country's Ministry of Public Affairs, Public Health, Medical Services into action, and play out the same game, the same scenario, playing out the same phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 lockdown, shutdown, and they've managed to achieve that. Number 3, preparing for the worst, a rapidly spreading lethal respiratory pathogen pandemic. So you have it right there. So September 2019, they published an annual report planning to unleash a lethal respiratory pathogen on the populace in a pandemic kind of way, in a global kind of way. Financing, international coordination. Coordination, collaboration, community engagement are all the key words that they are using to create buy-in from us, from people who do care about others, who do care about health, who do care about taking care of our elderly and our children, but who are being conned into thinking that if we just engage in these particular behaviors and do exactly as we are told in terms of these top-down bureaucratic management protocols in the realms of contact tracing, testing, submitting to tests, submitting to precautionary measures which they decide are best, such as masks, such as quote-unquote social distancing, then we would indeed be engaging in the right community action for ourselves and our neighbors. We would be respecting ourselves and respecting our neighbors. We would be really, engaging in healthful, safe, and community-centered practices. So that's the problem, that it's when you read this and sort of see the double speak in the language, that's when you begin to really get a sense of what's going on really in our midst, and that's that we are immersed in as well, is really rule by deception. We are in the middle of a gigantic psyop which is using here and there actual material harmful agents against us. So for the most part, the coronavirus is probably just another flu virus that's not going to harm us. But on the other hand, this desire to unleash bioweapons on us is very real, it appears. So here we go. Look at the language. There's a very real threat of a rapidly moving, highly lethal pandemic of a respiratory pathogen killing 50 to 80 million people. I mean, is this the deepest dream and desire? And wiping out nearly 5% of the world's economy. This is why they have put it in language, and this is why they have published a report, because this is their intention. And holding this intention as a mission objective, they work all of their so-called preparedness actions around it. And the language is absolutely convincing. A global pandemic would be catastrophic, creating widespread havoc. The question really to ask is, why are you, as a preparedness monitoring board, why are all of you guys so focused on a possible pandemic? Where does that thinking come from? Where do these viruses come from? Where does the thought of these viruses come from? And then you go on to the military side of it. Who's developing these? In which labs? What are they developing? And unfortunately, yes, we are in the world of bioweaponry at that point and warfare at that point. So when they talk about disease amplifiers such as population growth, strains on the environment, climate change, dense urbanization, exponential increases in international travel and migration, now they've destroyed the airline industry, right? That's they're really kind of cut that down in one blow. So in any case, all of these supposedly increase the risk for everyone everywhere. This is the doublespeak. You've got disease amplifiers, and underneath you've got no mention of biowarfare. Leaders at all levels hold the key, their responsibility to prioritize preparedness. So this language where they're requiring leaders to prioritize preparedness is echoed in the international health regulations, which kind of puts the onus of responsibility on the leaders of countries and demands that they actually sign off or surrender to requirements, global requirements by the WHO and by this board to engage in preparedness activities continuously, to report back and show and kind of permit an auditing of their preparedness system and activities, and so on. Create transparency so that the WHO has got a hold over every prime minister or president and every country's health services. So this is how this world government has already been elbowed and jostled into place over the last 20 to 30 years. This has already happened. These quote-unquote leaders, traitors, have already signed off on this. They've already signed off on this deceptive language and this deceptive set of protocols and activities that they've decided that they're going to do, thereby literally throwing everybody in the world under the bus. The world needs to proactively establish the systems and engagement needed to detect and control potential disease outbreaks. Global public good that must meaningfully engage communities, from the local to the international, in preparedness, detection, response, and recovery. So you see, just as Greta Thunberg had everybody freaking out about climate change, and you've got kids worrying about climate change, and kids actually doing good things like going around picking up trash from the streets and helping clean rivers. Now you're probably going to see kids telling everybody to wear masks and socially distance, because we all need to be prepared. Because it's a global public good. So I'm sure that's coming next, and it's the kind of thing we've got to prevent. As critically thinking adults. We've got to step forward at this particular point in time, recognize what the heck is going on, and do our best to stop it. So here we go. Agenda 21, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are mentioned. To improve, I love this, investing in health emergency preparedness will improve health outcomes, build community trust, and reduce poverty, thereby also contributing to efforts to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Oh, great. Build community trust and reduce poverty. Sorry, the World Bank and its fractional reserve lending has not just failed at reducing poverty around the world, it's increased poverty. And poverty could have been removed many years ago, decades ago. It still could be removed overnight. poverty is being kept in place by large organizations like this, global organizations. So this is just nonsense. This is just language. So anyway, coming back to what this report is all about, this board says it's looked at a whole bunch of panels and commissions following all the many pandemics, the 2009, the 2014, 2016, and now we begin to see that all of these pandemics have been rolled out. Every single one of these, Ebola, Zika, whatever, the dengue virus, chikungunya, H1N1, they've all been rolled out probably from the Naval Bioweapons Lab or something similar. It's all been rolled out from a biowarfare lab. It's all been pandemically labeled, and it's been rolled out periodically. And what's been building is this global health security agenda, about which we'll find out more shortly. So, meanwhile, the language that's used is, we've allowed a cycle of panic and neglect. We need to ramp up efforts. We need to be prepared. We need to act, etc. And, in trying to find out what exactly this GPMB is all about, I found my answer here at the bottom of the page, advocating at the highest levels so that continued sustained commitments, political, financial, and social, are high in the political agenda, and will increase accountability for follow-through. So, the doublespeak over here is that you've got this global body sitting outside every country under the aegis of the WHO and the UN that's going to hold every country, every nation state accountable, politically, financially, and socially. In other words, it's going to demand, it's going to assess, it's going to make sure that every single country falls in with a plan and does exactly what these guys want them to do. Because why? The world is at risk, but we have the tools. We need leadership, the willingness to act forcefully and effectively, and therefore we have our puppets in place. So here are the 7 actions that they want the world to do. Commit, and I'm going to kind of fly through this, and I'll come down to the end pretty fast. Heads of government must commit and invest. Prioritize, dedicate domestic resources. So in other words, never mind that you have other priorities as a nation. You need to make sure your people are employed, your people are happy, your people are safe, healthy. No. You've got to engage in a massive fear cycle over here. Focus on viruses and pandemics that are going to be coming your way down the road, and start building infrastructure to standardize healthcare, to standardize prophylactic treatments, and standardize medical treatments, so that you'll be ready, you will be prepared. And this is part of national and global security, universal health coverage, the Sustainable Development Goals. Everyone needs a national action plan for health security by September 2020. And you have to have identified your resources and started to implement your plan. So really what we are seeing now today in July 2020 is the implementation of this plan, the National Action Plan for Health Security of your particular country, whatever your country's come up with, which is probably a carbon copy of what the country next door has come up with, is being implemented right now. Countries and regional organizations must lead by example. And now the mystery about those G7 meetings, G20 meetings, G77 meetings is revealed. This is what they sit around talking about, global health security and engaging in these national action health security plans and needing to follow through. So progress indicator for this one, you've got to have these regional organizations monitoring their commitments to preparedness for health emergencies. So you see how already countries have been kind of clustered and clubbed into little larger regions now through these G7 and G20 and 77 programs. All countries must build strong systems, whole of government, whole of society approaches, multi-sectoral simulation exercises, prioritize community involvement, building trust, engaging stakeholders, legislators, representatives of human and animal health, security and foreign affairs sectors, private sector, local leaders, women and youth. So you see, these are the large parties of people in our midst who are going to be conned, if they haven't been conned already, into doing all these things in the name of global public good, global public health, national health, public health, etc. But what it really is a very communal, can't think for yourself, just fall in line, follow the plan that someone else has set up for you kind of system, and do what's asked for you. Go ahead and vaccinate those poor babies. Give them polio. Don't think twice about it. It's the oral polio vaccine from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's supposed to be for the global public good. And, just leave that area and don't look back, where you see hundreds of girls and young boys struggling after they get polio. So we all know that scandal about the Gates polio story, which really needs to be covered in detail, but about which there's very little information really. It's something hard to cover. Anyway, going back to this, the Strong Systems Progress Indicator by September 9, 2020, you've got to have a coordinator, a board, commissioner, or agency, somebody to lead. The WHO is going to have cost packages of priority interventions, harmonized coordination mechanisms, networks, institutions, etc. Countries, donors, multilateral institutions must be prepared for the worst. Here we go. This is all about the lethal respiratory pathogen, whether naturally emergent or accidentally or deliberately released. People have got to have vaccines, therapeutics, surge manufacturing capacity. That's being built right now as we speak. We see the news every day about sudden large numbers, millions of vaccines, millions of tests being created. The DoD is investing millions, if not billions, I forget the figure I looked at, in developing the material for the mass. And so forth. That warrants a separate report in itself. Broad spectrum antivirals, appropriate non-pharmaceutical interventions, etc. More about those non-pharmaceutical interventions later when we go and look at the international health regulations. Countries need to develop a system to share genome sequences of any new pathogen for public health purposes. So this is why we are seeing international cooperation at this point in time, with doctors in India cooperating with doctors elsewhere, all under the aegis of the WHO, to develop vaccines. I read in the paper the other day that an Indian company, a biotech company, has developed a vaccine for India, and it may be rolled out very soon. And in the West we've got other countries. We've also got Israel with its remdesivir, and we've got other vaccine companies, I think, working on vaccines. And that's constantly in the news now. We hear everyone talking about how we're all waiting breathlessly for a vaccine, and the people who are conned, the people who think vaccines are going to save them from viruses, and who believe in vaccines, even though there's enough information out there about the toxins and the harmful pathogens in vaccines today, these people are the ones who are all going to line up, and as Peggy Hall stated very eloquently on the show a few days ago, they're going to line up to permit this SARS-CoV-2 virus to be actually injected into their bloodstream and into their children's bloodstream. All these very healthy people who may soon sicken and die, given their absolute ignorance about what vaccines are all about. So, sharing genome sequences for any new pathogen, progress indicators by September 2020. Countries and donors have got to identify timelines for financing and development of a universal influenza vaccine, broad-spectrum antivirals, targeted therapeutics. You see, so influenza is here to stay, apparently. Well, everything is here to stay when you can develop it in a lab. It's like fiat currency. It keeps staying with us because you can just build it out of thin air. So here we go. They want the global organizations, the WHO, the UNICEF, the Red Cross and Red Crescent Federation, and academic partners to identify strategies for increasing capacity and integration of social science approaches and researchers across the entire preparedness response continuum. So, look ahead to where academia is going to progress in the future now. So, just as multiculturalism began to become a big thing, and now we see got its impetus from think tanks outside the university, similarly we are hearing about preparedness becoming the new keyword for the next age, the next academic age, where we're going to see whole departments in the social sciences, probably in the humanities, devoted to preparedness response. So converting human endeavor, human intellectual focus to this fear-based preparedness response scenario. Financing institutions must link preparedness with financial risk planning. Okay, great. Bring the banks in, bring the financial institutions, consultants in as well. Everyone's got to worry about risk planning and systematic country diagnostics for IDA credits and grants via the World Bank. So I guess this is what the World Bank spends its time doing. Finding the next best thing to create fear around so that preparedness responses can be found and funded. Global funds to fight AIDS, Gavi, should include explicit commitments regarding preparedness. And, this links also with all of these institutes and these foundations putting out grants to people for various aspects of this preparedness response. Progress indicators, IMF and the World Bank should integrate preparedness, international funding mechanisms, expand the scope to include health emergency preparedness. It's all about extending this notion of the emergency room in the hospital to the entire world. So we all live in a state of breathless anticipation to see the next emergency roll in to our own lives, to our own living rooms, health emergencies. Development assistance funders must create incentives and increase funding for preparedness. Same thing. Increase funding. Member states need to agree to an increase in WHO contributions for the financing of preparedness and response activities and must sustainably fund the WHO. Isn't that interesting? So this is sort of strong-arming the entire world into accepting the WHO financing scenarios, plus agreeing to actually fund the WHO. So I think Trump has done a fabulous thing by saying goodbye to the WHO. That needs to be done by everybody. And if our current governments do not do it, then those governments and those so-called leaders in these governments need to be replaced. Progress indicators, they've got to agree. They've got to provide financing. What was that actually? Oh wow, they've got to provide financing to a level of $100 million annually. So there's a little figure associated with this now. The member states, World Bank and donors must set up a huge fund called the Contingency Fund for Emergencies at a very high level, $100 million annually. And every country is responsible for that. The World Bank is responsible for that. Donors, who are kept very vague, but probably mean, people like the Melinda Gates Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundations, etc., are also engaged in this fashion. The UN must strengthen coordination mechanisms, and this has to do with across countries, and it probably has to do with airline travel and things like that. But, this brings us, I think, toward the... No, it's not the end, sorry. It's sort of still the middle of the document. But it talks about the simulation exercises, which is repeated at the end. So yes, coordinated United Nations system-wide responses looked for over here, and 2 system-wide training and simulation exercises to be conducted by the UN, including the WHO, including one for covering the deliberate release of a lethal respiratory pathogen. I mean, we can't read this enough times. We've got to look at this very closely. This is on page 10 on this 48-page report. It is the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board annual report titled A World at Risk, and you can get it off the WHO website, I think, or just Google it and you'll find it. So the WHO develops intermediate triggers to mobilize national, international, and multilateral action. Secretary General of the United Nations convenes a high-level dialogue with health, security, and foreign affairs officials to determine how the world can address the threat of a lethal respiratory pathogen pandemic, as well as for managing preparedness for disease outbreaks. So I'm actually going to fly through this a little bit because I don't have much time over here, and I need to move on to the international health regulations. So what I'm actually going to do is move forward here. You can see over here the many outbreaks over the last, actually not the last 7 years, but from 2011 to 2018. 1483 epidemic events in 172 countries tracked by the WHO supposedly. And these are the influenza, SARS, MERS, Ebola, Zika, plague, yellow fever, etc., etc. And here you've got the graphic depiction of that across the world. And I'm sure they've got other treats being created in various labs. The poor suffer the most, economies are vulnerable, yes, we do know that. And drop in tourism, no longer in work, decline in revenues, which they've successfully achieved currently. What is preparedness? It means putting in place mechanisms to allow national authorities, multilateral organizations, relief organizations to be aware of risks, deploy staff and resources quickly once a crisis strikes. So, it's basically about changing our world completely to focus public endeavor, focus social endeavor entirely on this notion of preparedness for health emergencies. So if we're seeing a glorification of doctors and nurses and, having seen people clap for them, etc., I think we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. They are trying to lead this world into a world where we all look up to the guy in the white coat and we all fall over and worship the syringe and the inoculation and the vaccination and the IV and the emergency room, and completely forget about natural health care, Ayurvedic healthcare, Chinese medicine healthcare, acupuncture, all of these wonderful modalities which, as you know, they've taken care to have us think of as alternative when these are true healthcare measures and save all of our lives. That's the kind of worlds they want, apparently. So this is what I wanted to bring this highlight over here before I cut out of this document. Over here, it's on this page. Leadership drives progress. All countries have adopted the binding international health regulations, IHR 2005, a treaty requiring governments to develop national care capacities to detect, assess, report, and respond to health threats, as well as to report any public health emergency of international concern to WHO and to take corresponding action. So this is the point. When I came to this point in this document, I looked up international health regulations and I found it online. Again, it's at the WHO. You can go find it. This is the document. This is the second edition, published in 2008. And let me actually enlarge the TOC so you can see what it is. So, very briefly, what this document really is all about. It codifies everything. And remember, so these countries, 196 countries, have signed off on this document. They have agreed to what's in this document. This document is if you read it closely, you can tell it is the code to which these countries and these countries' leaders have bound themselves to, and it is a code or a treaty or an agreement to submit to the authority of the WHO and the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, to submit to sharing data across borders. And you know, whose data is this? This is personal data, quote unquote personal, because the word personal really is being used in a kind of corporate way, the notion of person as corporation, etc. But it's really your private data. It's your DNA data, it's your medical health data, it's your data and my data. It's your DNA data, it's your medical history data. It's everything about you. This data is being collected and it is being, stored in gigantic global databases, but it's also being provided to these large global organizations. In other words, this particular document right here seems to be the document by which all of these countries have submitted to a global government, to a one world government. So if people think that, the New World Order, the one world government is round the corner, yet to come, might not happen, it's just a conspiracy theory, take a look at this document, just read it for yourself and figure out what it actually means when every leader of all of these countries agrees to doing a whole bunch of different things, setting systems in place to monitor people's health constantly, setting systems in place to assess people at borders, at specific places, constantly, and particularly during the time of an epidemic or a pandemic. A lot of this language has to do with a pandemic. And then have a whole bunch of protocols in place to address the issue of people being sick. And we see that in action now with this COVID-19 stuff, right? With all these shutdowns and lockdowns and quarantines and whatnot. And so that's one part of it. And then another part of it is what kind of treatment, what kind of prophylactics, which is a preventative, leads directly in the direction of vaccines for this lot. Because this is the medical system world, the Western allopathic medical system world, which is absolutely wedded to this notion of vaccinations. So when they say prophylactics, they mean vaccinations. And then medical treatments as well, other kinds of medical treatments. And they've got these interventions actually, and I will actually go back and talk about non-pharmaceutical interventions in a minute. I think it's late. Okay, it's a little bit later on. Yeah. So this is a very interesting document. I recommend that everybody, just spend a little time looking through it. It's an 82-page document, but you can sort of fly through it. It's just language that repeats itself. So it starts by saying that the World Health Organization is focused on the control of the international spread of disease, and this document is focused on that particular aspect. So the authority to adopt regulations designed to prevent the international spread of disease. So it's all done, as you see, in the name of public health. It's all for the global public good, etc. So it's based on other documents that preceded this. The 48th World Health Assembly document called for a substantial revision of the regulations adopted in 1969. And and it tells you how it's worked with member states to come to these strictures and protocols, etc. And it has a lot of innovations, and it requires state parties to develop core public health capacities. Now look at that language right there and tell me that that's not a one world government. State party obligations to develop certain minimum core public health capacities. If you as a country are responsible to a larger organization to do something, then you're not really a sovereign nation in yourself. You're not really taking care of your people on your own. You are working with this larger body over here. So that's kind of the preliminary. There's just one little thing that caught my eye. That's the protection of the human rights of persons and travelers. Right. Through the course of this document, you will see that travelers are the jewel in the crown for their little pandemic plaza over here, because travelers are the scapegoats on whom all of these practices that they are striving to develop are going to be practiced on. So they love travelers, and they're not looking into your human rights at all. You'll find out in just a minute when you look at the kind of interventions they've got planned for you. So alright, this, it's just written in the language of treaty or agreement. It tells you who's who, and it tells you what they are actually doing in terms of this agreement, and what how member states are involved and accountable, and what they are required to mobilize in their communities. They are required to build, strengthen, maintain capacities under the International Health Regulations 2005, collaborate actively with each other and the WHO, provide support to developing countries, take measures to further the purpose of the IHR, and then work with a whole bunch of other international organizations such as the International Civil Aviation Organization. And prepare guidelines for implementation, create an IHR roster of experts, and so on. So before they go into what these protocols and regulations are going to be, they define their terms over here. And the two terms I think I'd like to really look at are coming up. Here we go. So in the case of a traveler, voyage involving entry into the territory of a state other than the territory of the state on which the traveler commences the voyage, intrusive means possibly provoking discomfort through close or intimate contact or questioning. Invasive means puncture or incision of the skin, insertion of an instrument or foreign material. So, it's very interesting that these two terms are being distinguished in this fashion. I think we need to know how they are defining it. Not that you have to accept their definitions of it, because you certainly need to question their definitions themselves, but it's interesting just to see how they've defined it. Intrusive they see as provoking discomfort through intimacy or closeness, or even questioning, harassing questioning. Invasive is actual incision. So a vaccination would be invasive intervention, which you, by the way, are always, in any part of the world, under the Nuremberg Code, etc., always at liberty to refuse. You are at liberty to refuse or to decline any invasive surgical or medical intervention. But I would imagine you're also at liberty to refuse intrusive interventions in the sense of the word that they are currently using it over here. But look at what they've got for the invasive. For the purposes of these regulations, medical examination of the ear, nose, and mouth, temperature assessment using an ear, oral, or cutaneous thermometer or thermal imaging, medical inspection, auscultation, external palpation. Look at that. That's hugely invasive. Touching your skin. Retinoscopy, external collection of urine, feces, or saliva samples. Wow, sounds invasive to me. External measurement of blood pressure. Electrocardiography shall be considered to be non-invasive. So they are calling all of these things non-invasive. for the purposes of these regulations, because they're striving to really make inroads into your human body and into your bodily autonomy, and trying to take over as much as possible. So that's just something I wanted to point up, that these regulations are considering some highly invasive procedures non-invasive because it suits their purposes. This does not, however, set it in stone by any means. It's for the purposes of this document. That's all. And anybody who is traveling, who finds themselves subjected to humiliating questioning or discomfort through close contact, or is being asked to take a test, a nasal swab, or a vaccination, can simply say no, because these are interventions you decline. These are medical and surgical interventions that you are in no way obligated by any law, national or international, to submit to. So, moving on from there, you have, all of the information about contact points in each country and how information is going to be collected regarding events. They're talking about certain pandemic events arising in countries, or people showing up with a disease through surveillance activities. And state bodies are required to notify the WHO, communicate directly, provide detailed public health information. These are called notified events, when there is any kind of event that causes, that they presume is going to be a public health emergency. And we've seen evidence of that in the news. In India, there was this one meeting at a mosque which was seen as some kind of risk, and I know now that people going to the beach or people going to a pub is now seen as some kind of risk. So it seems like this simulation exercise is simply being played out, and these are the latter parts of it. So keeping the WHO informed is part of this whole section, so I'm not going to read all of that. And then the WHO will come back with recommendations as to what to do, so that's what these other sections are all about. And these are very close kinds of recommendations, where they would review travel history, proof of medical exam, proof of vaccination, place people under public health observation, implement quarantine, isolation, tracing of contacts. Tracing of contacts is here in this document, September 2019. So you know that contact tracing, which is now in mainstream media, has been planned for a long time. And so has all the other stuff that Bill Gates is now talking about, digital immunity, the COVID pass, etc. There's huge amounts of information on this now. We're slowly beginning to find out there's so many companies that are engaging in this digital immunizing stuff. Again, subject for another video. I'll have to actually move toward a close in a few minutes here. So, this moves on to ports, airports, ports of entry, and how people in these states are required to monitor people who arrive, their baggage, etc. And then what travelers can expect to submit themselves to, and that's here in Article 23. They get to look at the traveler's destination, the origin point, the itinerary, and subject them to non-invasive medical examinations. In other words, all of those things mentioned earlier. The thermometer, the temperature taking, all of the external blood pressure monitoring, the ECG monitoring, all this other stuff is being seen as non-invasive. But, everybody who's traveling needs to know they're well within their rights to say no to any of these. You just say no. Very often I think airports and airlines will not let you board planes or enter airports without submitting to some of these, and I think some of these strictures currently are the mask, submitting to external temperature taking, those two in particular. But the mask, as Peggy Hall has explained to all of us, people are medically exempt and can be medically exempt. You can claim a medical exemption. They do not need to ask you for documentation. They cannot, just based on, definitely in the US, based on HIPAA rules and medical privacy, they cannot. I don't know if this is true for every country, but you could give it a shot. You could say that, you have a medical condition, you need to breathe, you are subject to, I don't know what, asthma or anxiety attacks if you can't breathe, as most of us might be subject to if we can't breathe through these masks through which you really can't breathe. So this section is interesting because it talks about people being offered prophylaxis or vaccinations. And then travelers to be vaccinated shall be informed of any risk associated. So this language is very disturbing to me because it suggests that at some point they might take it upon themselves to simply vaccinate people. So you can't travel, in other words, if you don't get vaccinated. This is why reading this document is really important, and beginning to find out more about the situation is also very important, and beginning to speak out, really, and push back against this mandatory traveling vaccination kind of scenario. Everybody kind of needs to do that, really. So, and there's a lot of other information about ships, aircrafts, civilian lorries, trains and coaches in transit, and then other health measures, treatment. I wanted to move very quickly to article number 44, and then after that I think I might close down for now. See, here we go. I think I just blew past that. Here we go. State parties shall undertake to collaborate with each other to the extent possible in the detection and assessment and response to events as provided under these regulations. Provision of technical cooperation, logistical support. So this is what it means when all the countries are working together worldwide. They're supposed to help each other financially, logistically, technically, and they're supposed to set up laws. So you see, this is the next step as well over here, where this is why we're at a dangerous point. So people need to be aware that laws are in the process of being passed or in the process of being proposed that people need to be aware of and need to speak out about. So the formulation of, I'm sitting next to a lamp and it's super hot. The formulation of proposed laws and other legal and administrative provisions for the implementation of these regulations. So these regulations are being considered central and sacrosanct, and states are required to set up legislation to permit submission to these regulations. So think about how strange that is, and that's definitely one world government, and not just one world government, but positive fascism. So communism, right? So the WHO will collaborate to evaluate and assess public health capacity, provide technical cooperation and financial resources. So, and then you've got 45, treatment of personal data. This is really literally, this is also very interesting, but it's literally about sharing personal data. And also transmitting and handling biological substances, etc. So, this is a very eye-opening document. Highly recommend everybody reads it. And after these regulations were published, people were given a little bit of a leeway, I think 6 months or something longer, to present reservations or reject any part of this. And then after that, these were sort of set into law in terms of the international agreement that they all signed off on. And so basically it's not just nanny state that we're looking at nanny world with a syringe and no way of avoiding it. So So it is and there's all sorts of health certificates and documentations for travel that's mentioned over here. And here we have the countries, state parties to the international health regulations, and entered into force on 15 June 2007 for the following states. You can see the entire world appears to be here. Asia, Europe, South America, Central America, Africa, and you have reservations that have been mentioned, which really don't sound like reservations. The government of India reserves the right to consider the whole territory of a country as infected with yellow fever whenever yellow fever has been notified. So that doesn't sound like a reservation. It just sounds like an extension of the fascism. Anyway, so very interesting all around. But basically this international health regulation has been agreed to, and it's a binding international legal agreement. So within this realm of this judicial system or legal system that these countries have bound themselves to, they have bound themselves to this particular agreement. And they have all agreed to do exactly what the WHO and the Global Preparedness Monetary Board demands of them. So this is me just returning to that. Global Preparedness Board. The progress as of July 2019 is 190 countries reported their progress in implementing those regulations. The IHR in 2018. They have a self-assessment annual reporting tool. This is, like self-bridling or self-masking, getting countries to do it themselves, self-monitor. 102 countries have conducted a voluntary joint external evaluation. 103 countries have conducted simulation exercises. 51 countries have completed after-action reviews. 59 countries have developed a national action plan for health security. 51 have costed them. So outbreaks of epidemics or other global health threats are now being given the same high level of attention, not just by the G77, but by all of those countries, the 196 countries worldwide. So they've been raised to the level of terrorism, natural disasters, etc. The Global Health Security Agenda, a multi-country coalition launched in early 2014, aims to increase country-level capacities and coordination for disease detection. So this is part of those keywords I mentioned earlier, global health security. This agenda is actually a coalition. And there are many others. There is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI. You may have heard that before in conjunction with Gavi and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it's interesting to me to find that this coalition was founded in particular by a group of countries which include India. Germany, India, Japan, Norway, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and the World Economic Forum founded the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations to facilitate focused support for vaccine development. So these countries have, in conjunction with the Bill Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and the World Economic Forum, all of whom are focused on population reduction, founded an organization to focus on vaccines, to supposedly combat major health pandemic threats, but which are not going to do that, but which are going to be part of this global depopulation agenda, it appears. So, only 1/3 of countries have the capacities required. While progress has been achieved, many countries struggle with funding. So this entire thing is leading up to actions that they are recommending toward the end. Heads of government must see these as binding obligations under the IHR. This kind of holding these leaders in these countries to these regulations as absolute musts. They've got to dedicate domestic resources. They've got to be part of national global security, the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. They must lead by example. They're going to be monitored by WHO on a regular basis. Here's the world of the future, run by nurses who buy these stories, not the other nurses. I know there are wonderful nurses out there. So progress to date, 103 simulation exercises, 50 after-action reviews have been conducted. 26 countries have had a national bridging workshop. All countries must build strong systems. I am kind of flying through this, I'm just showing you what is happening here with this global monitoring preparedness board. It's requiring that these countries simply comply, and that's what this document is all about. So they've got the regulation document, which was sort of a binding international legal agreement, and then they've got this document saying you've got to comply with that document, with those rules that you've already signed off on. And this, in a sense, so this is the point at which I move away from this document. A multi-pronged effort is required to create an environment where policymakers and communities demand the planning and resources necessary for effective preparedness. So you see, it comes back to co-opting communities, co-opting humanity, co-opting caring and concerned people. It's about co-opting, and it's about buy-in. It's about trying to get people, urge their policymakers, and to get the policymakers make the laws to create an environment of living in absolute fear, waiting for the next pandemic or epidemic or the next health emergency, and then having all these systems, these highly invasive and intrusive systems and protocols in place to manage that health emergency, which is probably nothing but the unleashing of the next new bioweapon. So they want buy-in, they want consent, they want communities to consent, and that's what all of this is about. So it's very distressing, actually, to read this whole document and to see that by this means, and also they're paying for it themselves. Member states are paying for this themselves. So you're paying to let the WHO and this global board take over your health freedom in your country, and you are committing to standardizing healthcare in your country. Actually, it is standardizing population management in the name of healthcare, is what it really is. Because healthcare is a whole different subject, and individualized healthcare and independent healthcare is really how people become healthy, by actually taking care of themselves individually. And submitting to larger groups, submitting to larger organizations, as this expects and demands, is absolutely part of the problem over here. So I'm just going to briefly fly through a couple things. One is this video over here, and this is a video that was made about this event 201, but made recently. And I don't know. Okay, the sound doesn't appear. Oh, here we go.
These epidemics epidemic events are getting more and more disruptive to health and to economy. And the reason we called it Event 201 is we knew eventually one of these days, one of those events would be the big one. And that big one would really challenge our capacity to respond. And to respond to the big one, we do need to have all hands on deck.
So I'm just going to move toward the end. So this is all from the World Economic Forum. And if you go to stimson.org and just type in global health security, you will see a whole bunch of documents and reports from the 2010s and onward that I have looked at, talking about global health security and the building of the global health security agenda. I looked at one of those, I think it was this one, the Julie Fisher and Rebecca Katz Momentum for Global Health Security op-ed, and it talks a little bit about coming together to fight every kind of biological danger. America signed an agreement with the World Health Organization to affirm our commitment to meet this challenge. This was in 2013. And so there is a US WHO Memorandum of Understanding and a formal recognition of global health security. So that's something else to look up to see what that's all about. But you know, it talks about how the US has been moving toward that. The US has been moving, as many people know, toward globalism. Well, the deep state, right? The Obama administration, the Bush administration. Hopefully Trump is rolling all that back. Looking up Wellcome, you see Wellcome's partnership with the World Health Organization. And, you know, the whole Wellcome Trust foundation itself is a huge subject in itself. So I'll tackle that another day. Wellcome is working with the WHO. That itself is also very interesting. But I'll go into that another day. If you go to the WHO and you click on, I think, how did I find this? I probably went to the newsroom and looked up, oh, I know what it is. It's Sustainable Development Goals. Look up Sustainable Development Goals. Oh, actually, just go to the top and type in Global Health Security, and you will see this as one of the options. So you can pull it up, the Global Action Plan for Healthy Lives and Well-Being for All. And this is completely related to those Sustainable Development Goals that you'll see in the WEF, and you'll see in Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. So after you've read the international health regulations and then you see the Global Action Plan, it will automatically click as to how they're doing this, how the doublespeak is working, and what they're really doing. Primary health care, think of that immunization schedule, torturing poor little babies with hundreds of vaccines. Sustainable financing for health. Anything sustainable is highly questionable. Community and civil society engagement, community buy-in. Determinants of health, standardized health care. Who is anybody to determine your health or my health? Your health care and my health care are not the same thing and never should be. Innovative programming in fragile and vulnerable settings and for disease outbreak responses. Research and development in innovation and access. More bioweapons and more vaccines. Data and digital health. Digitizing everything so we can control you with an RFID chip or nanotech in your body. What will success look like? Absolute slavery. Here we go. 360 degrees. Engage, accelerate, align, account. And submit. And there you have it. That's the Global Action Plan for Healthy Lives and Well-Being for all. So if you go to the gatesfoundation.org again and type in global security, you're going to see a whole bunch of grants across time. This is one of the ones that I pulled up. The Aspen Institute is, how is the Aspen Institute involved? How we work. Okay. Let me just go back for 1 second and see where that came from. Yeah, I just did a search and came up with a few possibilities over here to explore further. Oh yes, so this is from the Aspen Institute. Okay. And they're offering, I guess this stuff is just listed at, okay, it is a grants database at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the Aspen Institute in 2003 was offering a grant of $25,000 to support the publication of Biosecurity in Public Health in Search of a Global Treatment. So this global treatment or global vaccine program that we are seeing today, and all of the many global public health programs that we are seeing today, is something that has been intensively built up over time by all of these institutions and foundations, including this one, the Aspen Institute. And the topic is Global Health, Development, Public Awareness and Analysis, Advocacy, and the grantee location is Washington. And you know, this is part of the entire Washington scene. I've lived in the Washington area for a long time, and I'm a little aware of what goes on there from that side of things. But you see over here that this is how there is such a plethora of nonprofits in the DC area. And they are busy working on these kinds of grants handed out by institutes like the Aspen Institute. And here's Dr. Anthony Fauci speaking to, who was he speaking to? Elizabeth Cohen, the CNN senior medical correspondent, talking about various things related to COVID-19, including vaccines. I think this is
beginning of 2020 into 2021 and into 2021, they will have hundreds of millions of doses, and after a year or so, even as many as 1 billion doses. So if that's true, and we'll take them on their word, then you and I and others could have a vaccine that we might be able to take in December or January or February.
So just to play that back,
several of the companies, and I can't vouch for them, but they're saying it with confidence. Several of the companies are saying that by the beginning of 2020 into 2021 and into 2021, they will have hundreds of millions of doses, and after a year or so, even as many as 1 billion doses. So if that's true, and we'll take them on their word, then you and I and others could have a vaccine that we might be able to take in December or January or February.
Your dreams, buddy. So, unfortunately, I think there are people who are waiting for that vaccine, sadly. So, that's where we are today. We are facing the specter of vaccines and facing the specter of vaccines during travel, health certificates, digital immunity, having those digital passports that Bill Gates talked about, having all of that being rolled out. So all of that stuff is, the specter of that still looms in front of us. And unless people do something about it, that specter isn't going away. So I think it's important to understand exactly what we just found out thanks to Corbis Hendricks' information. This is a simulation exercise, and 194 or 196 countries, I guess we have to go back and count that list at the bottom of the International Health Regulations Agreement document to find out the actual number. But these countries, most of the countries of the world, actually agreed to this, signed off on it, and okayed it, and have been building up for it, have been working with the WHO and the Global Monitoring Preparedness Board for several years, over 2 decades probably. So this is sort of the world treason, perfidy, sedition that we have been treated to from our own country leaders and quote-unquote governments. So perhaps it's time to split from all of them, find our own sovereignty, and set up our own nation-states. On which note, I wish everybody a good night, and hope this information helps. Pass it around. Take little excerpts, post it everywhere. Use those go look up those documents, read those documents, send links to those documents to everybody. So thanks everyone for watching. Have a great night, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.